Matthew Tkachuk is a better hockey player than Patrik Laine. Prove me wrong, Sean Reynolds.
Hey, look, Matthew Tkachuk's a great hockey player. I'm a big fan of his, but you don't need to force him into a conversation, Ryan, to create relevance for him. Patrik Laine is a player who is historically significant already in the short amount of time that he's been in this league. If you take a look at the teenagers in this league, in the history of this league, only two as teenagers, that's Dale Hawerchuk and Jimmy Carson, have more goals than Patrik Laine had in their teens. He's top 10 scoring all time in players who are in their teens. Now, you tell me what Matthew Tkachuk has done so far in his career that would make him historically significant.
I guess this game is just about goals and history, but you mentioned one word, and that is relevant, and probably that is the name of the game for Matthew Tkachuk. Don't take my word for it. Just ask everybody around the National Hockey League. I love that you're in your little Winnipeg bubble and it's kind of this way, and that's adorable. But I think you talk about teenagers. Let the adults handle this, Sean, because this is a man's game, and Matthew Tkachuk is beyond his years. And sure, there's a few points different between the two players. They're very similar. Patrik Laine has a couple more games in the playoffs, couple more points in the playoffs, probably due to more team success than anything else. There is no doubt that he is a sniper. And you want to talk goals, but I want to talk about difference makers. I want to talk about entertainers. I want to talk about the guys who live rent-free in opponents' heads and certainly fans around the NHL. There's no doubt that Laine was a number 2 pick, but I don't think the Winnipeg Jets feel the same way, or else they wouldn't be letting him go potentially down the road. I think everybody at number 2, now that we know what we know, would take Matthew Tkachuk.
So you brought up two things there that I want to talk about. I think you're trying to talk about the intangibles that Matthew Tkachuk has. And yes, he's got intangibles. He's hard-nosed. He can do all those things. You also mentioned the playoffs. And here's the deal, Ryan. If you're going to boast about a player's intangibles, those intangibles should be the je ne sais quoi, the thing that just helps teams win. They don't know why. But I'll tell you this, you brought up the playoffs, and that's the big mystery here of why the intangibles aren't translating for Matthew Tkachuk. He's played 15 playoff games. He's only won 5 of them. He's only got 5 points in those 15 games. Patrik Laine has proven when he's been in the playoffs, he's a producer. Out of every 3 games, he scores every 2 games. He's a guy who's got it done. Listen, if Matthew Tkachuk is the kind of guy who has the intangibles to take a team somewhere, I take a look and what tells me sums up his playoff career so far. That year, the Flames were the number 1 seed. They were going up against the Avalanche. They start out, they win that first game, and Matthew Tkachuk is looking like this guy who's going to lead them through the playoffs. He gets 2 goals in that game, and then he goes dormant the next 4 games. He gets a secondary assist at that point in the next 4 games as they go 4 straight. Listen, if you want to talk about players who are going to get players somewhere, yeah, he's got the intangibles Matthew Tkachuk has, but it hasn't translated to playoff success. Patrik Laine has already been there and been a driver in that regard.
There is no doubt playoff success will be what ultimately determines a player's career. Stanley Cup rings, playoff success, I get it. But as this argument goes about who is the better player, I don't think it's in doubt. I think you can tell, and I think the players themselves would tell you that Patrik Laine is the better scorer. There's no doubt. Nobody thinks the game quite like Matthews. 2 or 3 steps ahead. He is in the teeth of it. But if you want to talk goals, go back to Nashville when he scored the goal between the legs. We can go back to him being a young player who assumed a leadership role on this team. It's fascinating because there are some similarities between the two players. And, whether or not they do deserve more playing time or be on that top line with regularity, that's up for debate. But where we stand right now, when you talk about difference makers, intangibles, relevant, a thinking man's game, and somebody who drags his teammates into the teeth of every fight, I'm not sure there's anybody who is appointment viewing quite like Matthew Tkachuk across the league. There are better players, certainly. But when you package everything in, I stand by what I said. I think if you look at that draft, and I think if you look across the landscape of the NHL, his ability to rub opponents the wrong way, I think you just let Patrik Laine sleep. In talking about Laine to Tkachuk last night, he said he is a dangerous, dangerous player. He said he can score with length. He doesn't have to be in close, where a lot of guys make their bread and butter. A lot of respect for that player. He tips his cap to him. and says he watches him on the power play in what might be the most dangerous power play. He's on the bench watching him because he doesn't kill penalties. But I think when it matters most, and as we look at this argument today versus 5 years and 10 years from now, we're going to see about the passion. We're going to see about those intangibles. We're going to see about that difference maker of big goals, timely goals, dragging your team into it, as I mentioned, and a player who ultimately, I think learned growing up the way he did in NHL ranks thanks to his NHL dad and his brother also in the NHL. The lineage is there as well. The smarts are there. I just think we're going to be talking about this player for a very long time, not just because of how good he is, but because of the difference he made.
Well, Ryan, I don't know if you accidentally waved the white flag there or not, but you're kind of making my point for me. Matthew Tkachuk talked about it. Patrik Laine can score from places that people just don't score from.
You're talking one dimension.
What that means is teams need to defend areas they typically don't have to defend when Patrik Laine is on the ice. You got to be aware. You got to go to spots where you typically don't go. What does that do?
He doesn't want to go where it's hard.
Hey, he goes where he needs to go. And what that means is guys have to follow or he's going to score on you. That opens up space on the ice for the rest of the players and makes the game easier for them. The one thing, okay, let's address the one-dimensional part of this. Patrik Laine is a player who's got one of the best shots that the game has ever seen before. He's a player in the vein of a Brett Hull and an Alexander Ovechkin. I'm not going to say that he's the guy who's going to grind in and deke and go in and score. And I'm not going to say he's going to ruffle feathers the way that Matthew Tkachuk does. But he's got a weapon that's akin to a nuclear weapon, unlike anything we've seen in the game before, unless you're talking about guys like Brett Hull and Alexander Ovechkin. And the big difference I want to talk about with these two young players, we're talking about ceiling. They're still young players. What are they going to achieve going through the rest of their career? Patrik Laine can score and put up points like the Brett Hulls did, like Alexander Ovechkin does.
That's the third time you've mentioned those guys. He's got 10 minutes in this league.
Ovechkin has had Backstrom his entire career setting him up. Hull had Oates. We haven't had that guy with Patrik Laine. He's accomplished what he's done, scoring 30-goal seasons like it's a bodily function. We've seen him do that without a true setup man. When he does finally find it, he's going to do things in this league that I'm sorry Matthew Tkachuk is just not going to be capable of doing.
I'm afraid the good ones make others around them, and they don't ask for more help. If you're good, they'll come to you. And last time I checked, the Winnipeg Jets have some pretty darn good young players to set him up. If you're really making the case that he hasn't had any help, you've already lost this one.
Well, I just hope that in the coming years for the Calgary Flames, some playoff success would maybe back up your argument, because so far it hasn't.